Welcome to the Consummate Athlete podcast, where we explore what it means to be a well-rounded, happy, goal-crushing athlete. Every week, myself, sports journalist Molly Herford, and cycling coach and kinesiologist Peter Glassford interview experts and chat through all of your training questions. We're excited to have you along for the ride. Hello. Welcome back to the Consummate Athlete podcast. Peter, how's it going?
It's going well. I'm standing again, so we'll see how the sound quality goes.
And the energy, yeah, we are back. It's been a while since we've gotten to record in our own home. Very exciting.
Yeah.
Lot of travels. I mean, I guess, this is the first one we're recording since I got home. People know we were in Italy doing an in-gamba cycling trip in Tuscany. It was gorgeous. Despite the rain, we had an absolute blast on the bikes. Really, just if you want like the highest level service on a bike tour, and you love food, you love wine, you cannot beat this. Definitely check it out. I think it's ingamba.pro is the website. They have trips all over the world. Just super cool company, great people. We loved it. But then from there, this lovely, relaxing, beautiful bike trip, I hopped on several planes to get down to Atlanta, Georgia, where I was at the Savannah College of Art and Design for 2 days, talking to students about sort of just my unconventional career path, all things Strong Girl Publishing. Actually, a ton of questions about this podcast, about Consummate Athlete, and the work we're doing here. A lot about the books that I write and that we've written. So that was great. And then I had another day of transit to get to Boston to go to the Human Powered Health Performance Lab, where I got to hang out with the women of the Human Powered Health cycling team, so Women's World Tour team. Super cool meeting them, seeing some old friends, seeing some new faces, and getting to do a VO2 max test of my very own, which, whoo boy.
That was the first time you had done that?
Yeah. You know me, I'm not usually one for testing, but when the offer came up, I was like, sign me up. This sounds fun.
When was the last time you went that hard?
Oh, God. That'd be never.
Yeah. Yeah, you said the mask was uncomfortable?
Yeah, actually, I was kicking myself because, people who've listened to this for a long time know that we spent the last year doing a lot of altitude tent stuff. We were sleeping in an altitude cubicle so I could get ready for Leadville, but we had the altitude mask for exercise. Like, I bought it and then never used it. And I was so mad at myself when I was doing the VO2 test because I was like, if I had just used that altitude mask for exercise, I think I would have done even better on I had a good test, I'm not gonna lie, but I think I would have done even better because I would have been so used to exercising with the mask on.
Could be. There's definitely like a teaching to the test type element with that stuff.
For sure, yeah. So it was a really interesting experience. I got a lot of really cool data out of it. I also got a gait analysis done.
And they thought that there wasn't much difference despite your ankle injury. So
that was really exciting.
Your physio and stuff has been going well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I am back to running, which is great because we're at that time of year where a lot of our questions there are around kind of this return to cold weather as, the days are getting shorter and the temperatures are dropping. And this is the time of year where I really don't like riding outside all that much, if I'm being completely honest. It's cold.
That's right. And I'm into my no indoors till December challenge, which has not been overly challenging because it's like 20 degrees or, 65, 68 degrees Fahrenheit. And so it really hasn't been that challenging yet in November. So we'll see.
It was pretty cold today. Actually, I rode up the escarpment today on my ride and I actually hit ice.
Okay.
Like, not much, but a little bit just on the sides of the road in the shade. So we're getting there. And I was definitely kicking myself for not having knee warmers on. Like, down at the base of it, it was fine. But when the wind picked up and I was up at the top, it was definitely pretty cold.
Sure. So we're going to speak towards a few of those, common problems with riding outside and ways to improve your riding outdoors. And we have a few other questions, right?
Yeah. So why don't we actually, because we're already on the topic, let's talk about the no inside until December. So this is something we've talked about for, I think, the last 7 years since we've had the podcast. It's a thing you've been doing, probably even longer than that. So basically just this kind of challenge, we'll say loosely, that we've presented to people for basically avoiding the trainer at this time of year where the weather is still not bad enough that you have to go indoors. However, before, we get into why that's a positive, we do caveat this. Because I think as we've gotten older, we've also gotten much more sensitive and empathetic to the fact that a lot of people work long hours and have families. And, the lack of daylight at night makes going outside, dangerous for some people, depending on where they live and, what their levels of comfort are. So certainly if you're someone who, the clocks went back, now it's dark at 5 and you don't get off work till 6, and the trainer is the option for you, absolutely go on the trainer. No judgment whatsoever. This is for the people who can do this challenge comfortably and sure, you might get uncomfortable because you have to ride outside a little bit, but you're not actually actively stressed about doing so.
I also say, the other thing is that you're not really training that much because it's November and probably your goal isn't for a while. So it's also not that the people doing this challenge are usually doing 20-hour weeks or anything, right? It's usually a pretty reduced week. You ride outside when it's sort of nice. You maybe take a couple unplanned rest days. You maybe do a walk. You maybe do more strength training, which is sort of like a weird asterisk exception that is allowed during this period, even though it's indoors. You could do it outdoors, but most people will do that in the gym or in their home. So, it's encouraging some of these practices that are typically done during the preparatory phases and the early base phases, base 1, where the volume is not very high. You're sprinkling in the starts of some cross training, the starts of some strength training, and you're really not trying to burn out. You're trying to maybe recover injuries. So that's really why I invented this, is I wanted to preserve some of that trainer motivation to really push it when I got to December, January, February, March, maybe beyond, because we are in Canada. So yeah, that's the idea with it. And so yes, people often shut down. And so the other thing that a lot of clients will do, for the reasons you mentioned, they work all day. There isn't really much other. They don't want to ride at night. We do have clients that will commute with a light. They'll do night riding on their mountain bike once or twice a week. They'll get the group together and they'll go mountain bike. So there's lots of people. I always say though, I would not go outside in the dark. Sometimes, our friend Jody has gotten me to go for a Monday night, sort of Monday night lights type scenario on the gravel bikes. We have a nice flat gravel, but I hate it. Just hate it. Everything about it, except for the friends are good, but I don't particularly like it. So if you can have friends play out, but what we say is this challenge could be a weekend challenge. And then,
totally.
And then you would just remove all that a little bit, where it's the only way you can ride your bike on the weekend is if you go outside. And if you choose to go for a hike or whatever you want to do instead, that's fine. But that would be the other way. A lot of people we coach actually take on that challenge, is they do it more of a weekend challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which definitely makes more sense for some people. And I mean, I was, vocal about this when we had John Shep on the podcast, especially for women, running at night, not always a safe thing, not always a comfortable thing. So definitely prioritize your safety and comfort above all else, even if that does mean treadmill or indoor trainer. Mm-hmm. But if discomfort just in terms of being cold is your issue, we were talking about this morning, especially with cycling. You know what? Yeah, it sucks to be cold when you're riding. Fortunately, gear can help with this. And we don't just mean just cycling kit. I think a lot of people assume I don't have a, heavy winter windproof cycling jacket. I don't have the brushed thermal bib tights. I don't have, XYZ cold weather thing that's specific to cycling. But I've found in, recent years, honestly, a lot of cross-country ski stuff, a lot of winter running stuff can all be repurposed for cycling outside when it's really cold.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and probably this isn't a problem for, bigger men, I would say, tend to do better in the cold. The bigger people, I remember, I don't know if it was Stephen Chung talking about that, in the Arctic and stuff, it's tends to be, you don't run into as many issues with thermal cold because there's more muscle mass. And then on the flip side, the people who do well in really hot marathons tend to be very thin and tiny, especially, right? The more muscle, the more heat is sort of how this ends up working out. So for the smaller people, you're going to have to wear hunting gear potentially, find your grandfather's old hunting coat and do that. I actually saw there was an Outside article just recently that was you are really underestimating the value and quality of hunting clothing.
As someone who grew up hunting, I have never underestimated that value. And most of my early seasons of running and riding were definitely done in hunting gear.
Right. right? So the gloves and the jacket. So if you're someone who just like has never gotten sweaty, in the winter when you're outside riding, you just are always cold, your hands are cold, your feet are cold, like find these like hunting jackets. This might be snowboard jackets and snowboard gloves, snowmobile gloves that are leather mitts, figure it out and overdress. I want you to overdress so that you get so uncomfortably sweaty that you have to go home because you end up getting cold from all the sweat that's like pooled inside of this. A step back from that too, that I think we've spoke about before is, you have your normal winter jacket, cycling jacket, and then you put your raincoat over top of that.
I'm a huge fan of layering a raincoat. I think even if you don't have a cycling winter jacket, you can do long sleeve base layer, long sleeve jersey, and then honestly raincoat, and it's about as thick as a winter jacket would be. I would actually say winter jacket is one of the last things I would recommend that a cyclist buy.
Yeah, it's tough. And so then what you'll find is you do get like the garbage bag effect. A garbage bag would honestly be like, you could also put just a garbage bag over your front and stick
you love the plastic bag down the front.
Yeah. But so what we're trying to do is get you so that you're sweating, and then you like, there's almost like a confidence piece that you can get hot outside, even though when it's, it's very cold. And then yes, you don't really want to get super sweaty. So you do have to start opening up coats, taking your gloves off, switching your gloves to a lighter set of gloves. And those may come back and forth, right? You might get up on top of a hill and have to zipper everything back up, put the raincoat back on top, put the snowmobile gloves on, and then descend. But then on the climb up, take all that stuff off potentially, or unzip it. And then as you're saying, like you can take that garbage bag or that raincoat and jam it up the front of your jersey so that you get like a wind layer. And then the back though will breathe and your shoulders will breathe. And then that can be, usually once you get warm, that's like a lot of that. That's probably enough. But yeah, that's the idea. And so what I try and send people out is like, go out and get so sweaty you have to come home, because that's pretty empowering.
Yeah, for sure. Love it. And I will, also add I'm sure I've said it a billion times on here, but just because it's cold out, just because it might be dark at the start of your ride, wear sunscreen. I usually try, and this time of year especially, I'm thinking like a heavy moisturizer that has sunscreen in it, just because your face gets wrecked by winter sun and winter cold, the wind. I mean, you said it even like a couple weeks ago, your lips are starting to crack because it's getting colder out in the wind. I've
damaged my lips. So maybe we need to look into like some SPF lip balm moisturizer stuff.
If you would just wear the lip mask I told you to at night, you'd be gorgeous.
Mask. Okay. There you go. So is that sort of that first topic, or was there anything else there around sort of riding outdoors?
I think so. We also just have a note, around safety. And like we said, only ride when it feels comfortable, but also, if you're planning on riding in the dark, invest in good lights. It's so worth it. There's so many great ones out there. And the light technology, even in the last few years, has come so far. Even the lights now that are like $100 are better than lights that were like $1,000 10 years ago, just thanks to batteries, basically.
Sure. Yep.
So front light, rear light, spare blinky light. All of a lot of the mountain bikers,
you'll run a helmet light and even a handlebar light. So then there's actually like, you have redundancy, but also that creates a very effective light, especially as you say, with the light technology being so bright now, it's almost like it's daytime.
Yeah. And any thoughts on motivation that we haven't covered just as it gets darker?
Yeah, I mean, it's again, like that is seasonality. So I think it's okay. Like that's over the last 2 weeks, I've had a lot of calls where it's like, I can only ride 6 hours on the trainer right now, and I feel really bad about it. And I was like, well, do you need to ride 6 hours right now? I guess to turn it around, like maybe let's try like 2 or 3, maybe 1 or 2, for the folks that are indoors, right? It is early. So just don't rush to max out your intensity and max out your volume. I always come back to that idea that Dan Cleather proposed of this adaptive capacity. If you just start at the max that you can do right now, there's nowhere to go. Let yourself adapt to a little bit, drip the stimulus. I think we've also talked about Steve Neal's sponge idea, right? Where there's like a sponge, and if you just pour the whole bucket on the sponge, it's not gonna absorb the training, the water, if you will. But if you drip the training or the water on the sponge is going to absorb lots, right? And so that's what we want to do. Now, some of us are big sponges and some of us are little sponges, and so you got to learn that. But that would be the idea with that. And I think sometimes these motivation things are we're just like too amped up too early, like slow.
For sure.
And again, that's why we're trying to do this no indoor till December challenge is to taper, or what's the word I'm looking for? Like spread the motivation across the winter. It's normal this time of year, especially if you're experiencing actual sort of late fall, early winter, sort of bland, crummy conditions. Just hold on to it. The other thing that I'm seeing a lot, and that we're doing a lot of review, we just did this with our AMA meetup. We do a meetup every month with the athletes we work with that we coach, is the goal setting. Like, you do need like a reason to go out and train when it's poor. Like, if you're not doing it for a reason, then why would you do it? Like, you're a smart human. Like, why would you go out and be super uncomfortable unless there was something you were preparing for? So the second you have a spring classic you're preparing for, a big Leadville type bucket list race, it starts making more sense why you're starting to get moving and going up the hill, even though it's icy on the side of the hill, like Molly said. So I would say those are the two things. Like, why are you in a rush? Back off a little bit. And then also, what are you in a rush for? Like, planning that goal.
For sure, yeah. And I will say this time of year, especially when it's like a little cold, you wake up, you don't really want to get up. You want to, you're like, oh, I don't want to go outside and get this workout done. It's cold out. I do think there's something to be said for just action breeds motivation. So just getting out and getting that first couple minutes of running or pedaling in. Very seldom does someone actually then be like, nope, still not motivated, and turn around and come home. So sometimes you just got to get out and get started.
Hard to do, but yeah, I think if you could have like a no negotiation, like day of type thing, I recall that was like, this idea that like you don't take off days today. Like, if you still feel the same way tomorrow, you can take the off day, but like today we don't negotiate, like you're going.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you go out in the intervals today, or the ride today was too much and you feel poor again tomorrow, that's fine. Or you can negotiate that and plan it. But yeah, that can sometimes be a good rule of thumb, but it is hard to motivate that when the snooze button's right there.
Yeah. Or, I've said the rule before, but if you're new to the show, my personal rule of like, sure, you can go home, but you're not doing anything fun. Right. You're doing one of the tasks that you've been absolutely dreading doing. Okay. Which is usually like invoicing or like some kind of paperwork. Toilet cleaning. Yeah, you're not doing anything. Nothing sexy is happening. Nothing lazy is happening.
Cool. All right. Well, is that a good segue to one of our ad breaks, perhaps?
I think it is. Let's talk about AG1, since we are kind of talking about this cold weather season. That also means cold and flu season, which means immunity and all of that fun stuff. And, we've just been traveling. Like I said at the top of the show, I started listing off all of the places I've been. That was a lot of airplanes and a lot of airports to be on. Knock on wood, I avoided getting sick. And I will say part of it I'm going to put down to AG1 and their travel packs.
Well, and I will say, you traveled, and then on the last couple of days, I noticed all of the athletic greens suddenly disappeared, and I was like, did you take all the athletic greens? And you said, yeah, I need all those packs to get me through the week that I'm gone. And I was like, okay, I'll just not have it, I guess, for the last day or two. And I got sick. Once I got home, I was sick this whole last week.
Really sounds like someone should count his own AG1 travel packs next time he travels.
I guess. So yeah, we love the NSF rating for sport. So that's, again, sort of like a third-party certification that it is what it says it is.
Yes, and what it is vitamins, minerals, probiotics, prebiotics, adaptogens. So sort of all of the good things you need. This, I think, is the 53rd iteration of it. So the sports scientists, nutrition scientists over there have been kind of consistently honing it and adding to it, subtracting from it as, more and more data emerges. So I love that they're, continually innovating with it. I also think it tastes great. It makes sure that I hydrate in the morning. And honestly, that was even a big part of it too with this past trip. The way that, the hotels and Airbnbs and whatever were set up, it would have been kind of hard to remember to drink water in the morning if I didn't have to take it. So, mixing that into 16 ounces of water made sure that I was actually taking in some water before I hit the coffee, especially in Italy, where the coffee is just, here are shots of espresso.
Right.
Very little hydration there.
Yes. So there you go. Is there a website that someone might go to?
There is a website someone might go to. It is drinkag1.com/MollyH. Again, drinkag1.com/MollyH. And if you sign up for a subscription, you get 5 free travel packs and a year of immune supporting of vitamin D droplets, which also taste great. So definitely check it out. Again, this is also really, this is coming out sort of in this like season of gift giving. And I do think it is a great gift for someone in your family who is maybe not great at eating their fruits and veggies or, that kind of thing. So we've gotten it for both of our dads in the past, and we'll continue to do so for sure. All right. So again, drinktg1.com/Molly H. We'll include a link to that in the show notes. Our next question is one that we both got an absolute kick out of when it came in. Can I watch bike racing while I'm riding the trainer? If you're someone who's been riding for, longer than, I'm going to say, 5 years, this question is laughable. Because until, 5 or 6 years ago, that was just the default. Like, it wouldn't have occurred to me to do anything else on the trainer other than watching bike races or, movies or whatever. But now, as people are coming into cycling, Zwift and all of these other different online virtual training platforms have kind of presented this other alternative where now that seems to be the default. And it actually, people are actually concerned that if they're watching bike races, it's going to throw off their training indoors.
Yeah, or maybe even just how do you do it, right? We always laugh because a lot of people who end up using Zwift end up using 7 other screens to try and keep themselves distracted. So I'm always like, well, could you just remove the Zwift? No offense to Zwift, but remove that. Now, the dilemma that I also don't like is that it's very hard for someone who's started with that as how they control this trainer to figure out how to use the trainer without paying someone a subscription. So
weirdly enough, it's getting harder and harder to do so.
Yeah, they're locking it down where you can't use something you bought without paying them a monthly fee, which is a smart idea. But there generally is a way to use your trainer in sort of a dumb trainer mode or something where you can sort of set the slope, set the gradient that you're pedaling your bike on. And that's the way I prefer to ride is just, I warm up with it on a 0% grade and then I increase it to a 4% grade and I do intervals. I use my gears and then I cool down with it on a 0% grade. And it's very simple that way. And then indeed, while I'm riding, I might watch a bike race. If I, want to get motivated, I'll watch a cyclocross or a World Cup and sort of just do the intervals along with everyone who's on screen. I really like trying to find things places I've ridden or races I've done, so if there are past video of a nationals that I've been in, even I find that even more, what's the word I'm looking for? Engrossing or
engaging.
Yeah, but there's a word where immersive, I guess even.
It's also a really great way if you do have a goal race. It's a great chance to watch every single video you can find of that race to really preview it and become a student of the race. You're going to be on the trainer for however many hours, so you might as well actually use them to learn about the race that you're targeting. I mean, we have so many people we know, so many clients doing Leadville, and to me, indoor trainer season in the winter, there's unlimited hours of Leadville footage that you can watch. I mean, especially in the last couple of years with the Lifetime Grand Prix, but even with just what people have captured on their own GoPros and posted.
So much. There's a guy, I did this for your run, so I was trying to get really good so I could
you were
guide.
way better.
So I was watching while I was riding the indoor trainer, I was watching head footage of a person, walking the Leadville course basically for the run, which isn't quite the same as the bike, but I was just watching this guy walking and his perspective. So there's so much now on YouTube that you just watch head cam footage of different climbs or descents. Sometimes I'll do, technical downhill trails too while I'm riding. And, I think there's a bit of a crossover there, but it's interesting if nothing else. But maybe there is a, line choice type thing where you're just reading the trail and sort of, I find my head starts moving, picking the lines on the video. So I guess the short answer is yes, you can watch bike
Definitely
racing.
do that. Yeah. And I think this is also an invitation to mix up your indoor trainer riding. So this is where, incorporating the rollers for some rides. So even if you, love being on Zwift, but you also really want to watch Cyclocross World Cup. So maybe this means that one of your rides every week is done on rollers, watching the Cyclocross World Cup. And the rollers give you a whole other set of skills on the bike, whole other challenge. So if you're looking for something new, something slightly terrifying, definitely try
Seems like last year more people went back to using rollers, which is good, but yeah, definitely they're way more comfortable, way more engaging. And I always say the indoor trainer, people think it's more perfect, I guess, or specific, but it removes, I always talk about the vision, so the perception, which again, maybe that real life headcam video is getting a bit more perception, even though you can't really act on it, so it's not really linked, but it is you're line choice is sort of this idea of perception. Where am I going? What am I looking at? And then there's balance. When you learn to ride your bike, what's the problem? It's that you can't balance. You fall over to the side, right? So when we ride the trainer, we remove basically those two things. Yes, there's some engine building, some fitness building, but it is really like removed from that, what bicycle riding is. So yeah, I think it's definitely worthwhile riding the rollers and mixing it up, right? Like there's nothing wrong with our indoor trainer. There's nothing wrong with, continuing to do that. I think that makes a lot of sense and is, in some areas is going to be important because you can't ride outside very much or can't ride outside effectively. So we definitely want to use all the tools and get that mix, just as Molly's suggesting. Mixing up what we're watching, what we're viewing, mixing up the thing that we're riding on, whether that's outdoors, rollers, or the trainer.
Yeah, and I think this is also a good chance to talk about sort of the circuit training with the trainer, which we've talked about so many times on this podcast. But you know what? I still don't think people are doing it, so it's always worth repeating. And I think this is harder to do when you're on Zwift.
No, and I do a feedback survey. Not everyone fills it out, but after I do consults, right, and it asks sort of like, what was the most useful thing for you in this consult? And so the one person I was consulting with this week, they actually said, like, I had just mentioned it in passing that of course you could include your bike as part of a circuit. And so this almost relates to the motivation question you had too. Like early in the year, I always find it very hard to sit indoors because it's boring compared to outdoors, and it is pretty tough, mentally, physically, all around. So this idea of including the bike in a circuit, you could compare this to a CrossFit, but it doesn't have to be a sufferfest. It could be very endurance focused, where you ride your bike for say 3 to 10 minutes, and then you do some sort of strength core yoga circuit. Pick 1 or 2 exercises or 3 exercises or 4 exercises, hop back on your bike and do that, so let's go with 3 minutes of biking, 2 minutes of core, plank and push-ups or push-ups and air squats. And then you hop back on your bike and you do that. And so we're going to do that 5 times 12 is 60 minutes. And what a great workout. Right?
Yeah.
And so people will say, oh, well, that's not specific, but it's like, well, what is mountain biking? It's sort of climbing up a hill and then you sort of do push-ups while you're hovering over your seat, not pedaling, right? And so in some ways you could say, especially for a mountain biker, this is actually
a cyclocross racer.
Sort of specific, right? But then also your heart is still beating. So you start getting more muscle mass. So especially for my athletes that I work with that don't cross train, they don't cross country ski, they don't do these other sports, swimming, where our more full body, where our heart is working differently and perhaps more maximally. If you can engage more muscle mass, there's a bigger load on the heart. And you start getting this shifting effect of blood moving around the body from your arms to your legs. The heart is really working. So then you start wondering if there's actually like an additive benefit to doing these type of sessions. There's a whole bunch of research around this. There's high intensity functional training, which sort of looks more at the CrossFit style stuff. And then there's another one that I can't recall that sort of looks more at that pumping, cardiovascular pump. And there's a name for that I'm blanking on, but really, really compelling. So it's funny. I go away from it because I forget it, and some people really hate it. So then I get don't want to put it in plans because people get grumpy, but I do think it's super, super effective use of your indoor training time.
For sure. Okay, well, I think that wraps our trainer rider question. Before we get to our last question, another quick word from our sponsor. This time we are talking about Payable. So Payable Apps is this super cool little, call it a widget created by our very good friend to help people take payments within Google Forms.
Mm-hmm. And you may think that you can take a payment in Google Forms, but in fact, this you require this add-on called the Payable add-on, and it's for Google Forms. And what it does is it lets someone pay you via your PayPal, your Square, your Stripe account, and really that's the idea. So let's say you're doing a children's camp on March break, and you're going to take payment, but you want to know who are the kids, who are their adults. Maybe you're going to get a parent sort of like to check box for the waiver or something like that, and it all gets done. And the great thing is you don't have to sign up for a subscription, you don't have to pay for a website. It's sort of all in that free base of Google Forms, and then it's basically your merchant processing as far as fees.
Yeah, it's actually what I use for all of my in-person book sales, which has been super helpful because, we have a whole built-out web shop and stuff, and that's its whole other thing. But then when I'm in person, my web shop does not work for that thing. So what I can do is I have this QR code that just goes straight to the Google form. People can run through it, show me that they've paid, and boom, they have books. It's really made it a lot easier. It's easy for my authors to be able to sell books in real life. A lot of them are at races, so it's a very simple way to quickly get that done. where they're not trying to like make change or like deal with, you know, transactions and stuff. So it's been such a huge benefit. And we actually helped the payable apps when they first started create a bunch of templates for Google Forms. So basically, you know, you have these templates that are school pizza day, athlete sponsorship, race registration, jersey order, t-shirt order, you know, subscription-based services even. So all different kinds of templates with a lot of sneaky bike racing type ones snuck in there, but also ones that were created that, you know, friends needed for their small business or for their classroom.
Weekly race has been used as well.
All that kind of stuff. So basically, whenever we had a friend that wanted to start using the software, we pretty much used that as an excuse to create a template. So if you know us, you probably, you know, have some use case for a payable form. So if you're ever trying to figure out a way to collect money, definitely check it out. We will include the links to that in the show notes. Or just head to payableapps.com. All right, last question. Is my heart rate actually lower when it's cold out?
I don't know about you, but it is normal to see a lower heart rate than maybe you're used to when it gets cold. So if you were this person who we were talking about in the first question, who's riding outside and now it's, you know, around freezing or even just, you know, into the, you know, in Celsius, it would be, you know, 0 to 10, or what would that be, like 40s, 50s in Fahrenheit. Yeah, like the idea is that your body isn't under the same thermal load, right? We would expect, you've probably all felt, you know, because it seems like it's so hot all the time, that like, you know, you go to a ride when it's really, really hot, or maybe you've done like an indoor training workout and noticed your heart rate's really, really high because it's hot in the room. You know, people seem to understand that their heart rate goes up when it's hot or when we go to altitude. So in the same way, when your body doesn't have to do as much to keep itself warm, you know, those vessels are going to close. And then, yeah, the heart doesn't have to pump quite as much blood to keep itself safe and, you know, moving. So there isn't that cooling requirement. Now,
you know, with that, do you think perceived exertion changes as well? And similarly, do you think power changes?
Yeah, I guess that would be the question, right? Is I don't think the perceived exertion changes a lot. You probably are feeling really cold too, so that maybe that affects the perceived exertion. I was going to say, by the time it's cold enough for that to be happening, I think nothing else is really going to be affected because it's going to feel hard as you're cold, and I think your power is still going to be where it's at for that heart rate. It could be, yeah. I find like that's why I like having powers, because it does help me sort of guide a little bit. Because I'll feel like, oh, I'm working so hard, but my heart rate's so low, right? And so I might actually be working hard, even though my heart rate, so that's where like the heart rate isn't a great indicator in that. So it is nice to say, okay, your feeling is actually accurate. You are pushing into that, say, zone 3 moderate type pace, but you keep trying to push the power up to try and get your heart rate up, but like just back down and ride in your power zones and your feeling. So it's not that your feeling is off, your feeling might be accurate. So that is where you that calibration. So I think for those who don't have power, which is common, you know, on your winter bike or your fat bike, you might not have power. I would always go with feeling. If it feels good, like appropriate, then just stick with that, right? If this feels like an all-day pace, it was supposed to be an all-day endurance style ride, then go with feeling. Feeling's pretty much not going to be wrong. So, you know, especially when we expand that over time, right? If this feels like too much, then back off, right? I think that's logical, but I think we all get into that trap of thinking, you know, oh, I'm going too slow or something like that.
For sure. All right.
Well, the other thing I always put, we have an article about this, so we'll link to that. You know, is my heart rate too low? It's a popular article this time of year. The other factors to watch are, you know, when we get in a lot of clothing or when it's cold, I think there's a tendency to start dropping your cadence to a lower cadence. And that would be one factor that does decrease heart rate, right? When we pedal quickly, you've probably experienced heart rate going higher, especially if you're not someone who does a lot of coordination. So on the flip side, if you pedal slow, you know, say you're down in the 50s, 60s, 70s, you're going to see perhaps a lower heart rate. So then this could be not related to the cold. This could be related to the fact that you're wearing snow pants or something and you're just pedaling slowly. So this is where counting your cadence, like if you see, okay, my heart rate's low, that's sort of interesting. Maybe doing like a cadence count and starting at 0 when you count. So you go right leg hits the bottom and you go 0, and then right leg comes through again, you go 1. And so what you would want to see is, you know, around 14, 15 right leg hits in a 10 second. So that means that you're doing about 90 RPM. 80s to 90s is what we're usually looking for when we can control cadence. Now, for some people,
Hate that.
yes, Molly, that's always says that, this is going to be hard for her. So that's, I think, a good general goal. But for someone who's used to pedaling in that range, but then it's cold, so they're on their fat bike and they're pedaling slower, that might be something. If you want your heart rate to come up, then normalize your cadence, and you may see your heart rate be normal because you've normalized your cadence. But if you're going to use a low cadence, you might see a low heart rate, if that makes sense, right? So it's really like, well, if you don't want to change it, then you're going to have a low heart rate. So I think that makes sense there. And then I guess the other guidance I give people is, we have this like more is always better. And so many people bang their heads against the wall because their heart rate's always at the top of their endurance zone. Like that's literally, like that is the cliche of endurance training and coaching, is that everyone's heart rate is out of their zone 2 and they're really sad about it, right? They want to go faster, but oh, my damn heart rate zones. So if you are lucky enough to have your heart rate go down to the bottom of the zone when it's cold out, just enjoy it.
Great.
So you might ride your endurance ride. I've had lots that are down in like even the 50s, 57% of max heart rate. But if your heart rate, normal people are not going to see that. So that it's going to be like, say it's 65, usually we use 65 to 75% as the sort of endurance range for maximum heart rate, percent of max heart rate. So if you're running 65, you're at the bottom of the zone. It's in the zone. Carry on, right? If the feeling feels right and you're in the zone, why are you trying to push the heart rate up? That's not low, it's in the zone. So try and rethink it as, rather than like higher is always better, until it's too high and then it's too high. That could be another paradigm to look at, is like there isn't heat stress. So of course you're going to have the heart rate a bit lower, and don't do anything to screw it up. Like that's, I think, a mistake you'll see people do is sometimes they'll start pushing that feeling and those wattage up. And it's like you've been cruising in zone 3, for hours, and then the next day what's going to happen logically? Well, now I feel super muscularly tired and burnt out because I pushed my feeling and my heart rate more than I was planning on my endurance day.
Right.
Yeah. So it is tricky.
Yeah. And then my last caveat is check your heart rate monitor, or your heart rate strap rather. Because in the summer, you kind of don't really need to like wet it before you put it on, because typically you're sweaty anyway.
So you're saying we should spit on it. Give a good lick to that.
Oh boy. Okay, we're gonna edit that out. But seriously, like make sure your heart rate strap, is actually working.
Damn.
Yeah. So yes, lick your heart rate strap is really where I'm going with this.
We have another one of our most popular posts is sort of like heart rate strap not working. Here's how you troubleshoot it, and that is, we'll see people put it over top of their undershirt. So maybe that is worth mentioning. And then, it just, if it's not damp, then there's nothing to like let those electrodes like go through, right?
Yeah, so you can usually get away with that in the summer because pretty quickly you're sweaty and like it just kind of gets wet on its own accord. But when it's cold out and you're not getting sweaty, especially if you have this like, it's cold, I'm like not wearing enough clothes, then you go a whole ride bone dry.
You could, yep. And I think you could also, you maybe did wet it, but it's taking you so long to get dressed and you're wearing so many like clothes that, your wool jacket is like absorbing all the moisture and then it's dry. So sometimes you can just move it with your hand and it'll, reconnect, there'll be enough moisture there that it'll sort of like move it around a little bit. But that is certainly another great variable to bring up, is like maybe it's just reading, 90 beats a minute because, it's not really reading.
Exactly, yeah. Cool. All right. Well, we have so many links to include in this show, so definitely check out the show notes. You can find them just in the show notes, whatever podcast player you're listening to, or head to consummateathlete.com for all of the links and all of the fun stuff that we're doing there. We also, side note, weekly newsletter. Sign up. You get, what happened on the podcast. You get what articles we have up, whatever's kicking around. So lots of fun stuff there. All right. With that, happy training, and we'll see you next week. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Consummate Athlete podcast. If you want to hear more training, racing, and endurance sport advice, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and review. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at consummateathlete.com for a weekly dose of inspiration and advice straight to your inbox.